In my overview of the Odyssey, I mentioned that the Cyclops Polyphemus had been portrayed in different ways in antiquity. As such, not only was the surprisingly empathetic character in Epic the Musical not that far off from the version we find in Homer's epic poem, but the mere act of recreating the Cyclops actually plays into a long-standing human tradition of reimagining characters from past narratives. We might think of the Cyclops today as a terrifying monster, if a misunderstood one, but how did people in classical antiquity reconceptualize him? You'd be surprised. Let's dive into antiquity and look at the ways that they portrayed the Cyclops through the lens of genre. Into which modern genres was the character Polyphemus arranged in antiquity? He may have had only one eye, but Polyphemus was a Cyclops of many faces. As the first documented appearance of Polyphemus, the Cyclops in Homer's roughly 8th century BCE Odyssey is the character upon which future depictions will ultimately be dependent. Before the scene in which Odysseus encounters him, he is mentioned right near the beginning of the epic poem actually, as the son of the sea god Poseidon and the water nymph Thoosa. But the fuller narrative comes in Book 9, where the Cyclopes are introduced as a barbaric people who don't grow food or govern in councils. Instead, they live in caves as isolated individuals or small families, and they live off sheep and goats and the goodwill of the gods. On his way home from the Trojan War, Odysseus and some of his men enter the cave of an isolated shepherd named Polyphemus. This Cyclops violates the ancient custom called xenia, guest friendship, or ritualized friendship, a theme of hospitality pervading the ancient poem. Instead of receiving the strangers as God-sent guests, he blocks the entrance to the cave with a great stone, eats 2 of Odysseus's men, and then repeats this twice more while otherwise going about his perfectly average day, tending to his sheep. He even whistles while he works. Odysseus and his men escape by getting Polyphemus drunk on undiluted wine and stabbing him in the eye. Polyphemus cries out so much that neighbors come, but when they ask who's hurting him, he says, "Nobody," or "No man," the fake name that Odysseus had given him. Quoting from the Ian Johnston 2002 translation, he says, "I'll tell you, then you can offer me a gift as your guest here. My name is Nobody. My father and mother, all my friends, they call me Nobody." Apparently nobody is hurting Polyphemus, so his neighbors leave him alone. Then Odysseus and his men bind themselves to the undersides of his sheep, and they escape when the flocks go out to pasture. Polyphemus counts the sheep and even speaks lovingly to the last and the largest, the sheep to which Odysseus is bound. "My loving ram, how come you are the last one in the flock to move out of the cave? Not once before have you ever lagged behind the others. No, you have always been well out in front, striding off to graze on fresh shoots of grass, and be the first to reach the river's stream. And you're the one who longs to get back home once evening comes, before the others do. But now you're last of all, you must be sad." We see that empathetic monster here. Once out, the Achaeans book it back to their ship, at which point Odysseus turns around and, against the better judgment of his men, shouts back taunts, including his real name, his father's name, and his homeland. An infuriated Polyphemus throws rocks at Odysseus, but this only creates waves which helpfully carry his ship back out to sea. The defeated Polyphemus then prays to his father Poseidon that Odysseus will not make it home, or if the fates have dictated he will, that he will only do so after much suffering. This right here is the foundational narrative of the Cyclops. It would technically fall under the genre of an epic, that is, a narrative with sprawling length, scope, and an array of subjects explored. Think epic fantasy, though this is ancient epic poetry. That said, I want to conceptualize the ancient narratives we'll be looking at through the lens of modern genres, as a sort of way of bridging our world to the ancient world. We could then call the Odyssey a kind of epic fantasy full of gods and fictional creatures and a myriad of characters to follow. But zooming in on just the Cyclops narrative, I'd actually categorize this particular story as monster literature. We could group Polyphemus the Cyclops among the likes of Frankenstein's monster, Count Dracula, or Jekyll and Hyde as stories of monsters with superhuman powers which terrorize some victim. So let's see how later authors build upon this story of the Cyclops and reimagine him and the story which contains him. Some 3 centuries after Homer's Odyssey, the classical Greek tragedian Euripides wrote a satyr play called Cyclops. A satyr play is a form of Greek theater that contains both comedy and tragedy and many common elements like masked and costumed actors conversing or giving monologues in verse, and of course a chorus of satyrs that dances and sings in Doric Greek. If you don't know what satyrs are, it's probably for the best. Just think of the god of wine and revelry, Dionysus. Satyrs were his boisterous and indeed decent companions whose appearance and general habits would not be considered safe for work. Now, these plays would be performed as a grand contest in the Dionysian festivals beginning around the 6th century BCE, and as a fun aside, Euripides' works were often restaged for centuries after his death, possibly out of nostalgia, but it's also possible that the restaging happened over and over because it was actually seen as financially safer to support an already known and likely to be popular play over gambling with a new one. Kinda sounds familiar, doesn't it? In a world of constant reboots and remakes. What's that saying? The more things change, the more they stay the same. Yup. Well, Euripides' play largely follows Homer, but there are some significant differences, including to the genre, and I don't just mean from epic poem to satyr play. It begins with a Silenus, that is one of the satyrs, the lead chorus member, telling the audience how much his life sucks. Picture a man disheveled and disgruntled holding a rake as he complains to the crowd about his work that he and his fellow enslaved satyrs have to do, tending to the flocks, filling the troughs, sweeping out the cave, all to serve an, quote, ungodly Cyclops at his impious feasts. His orders now compel obedience. I have to scrape out the house with the rake you see, so as to receive the Cyclops, my absent master, and his sheep in clean caverns. But suddenly, ships arrive, and, quote, luckless strangers, who don't realize the mess they're getting into. When Odysseus walks up, he chats with Silenus a while. There's a humorous line when, after Odysseus says he's the king of Ithaca, and he's on his way home from Troy, the satyr says, how is that? Didst thou not... Oh, God, it's formal translation. Didst thou not know the passage to thy native land? Maybe they were trying to capture the sense of verse, and so they made it all formalized. Anyway, the satyr is basically saying, wait, you're on your way home? And now you're here? Which is a fair question, because it's twice as far as the distance he needed to go to get home. Anyway, the sailors ask if they can trade. They don't have gold, but they do have wine, which the satyrs cannot resist. Remember, they were the servants of the god of wine and revelry, Dionysus. Seriously, several lines of dialogue are just the satyrs asking about smelling and sampling the wine. They savor every moment of being near it. Silenus then trades food that he is not permitted to sell, and as luck would have it, it is after he has exchanged the goods that the Cyclops comes home. Immediately, the satyrs just blame Odysseus, claiming he stole the food. Odysseus tries to defend himself, first by blaming Silenus back, and then second by trying to reason with Polyphemus, but you can't reason with a monster. Odysseus tries appealing to selfishness as well as pity, arguing that greed and wickedness often lead to retribution. But the Cyclops returns that, quote, wealth is the god for the wise, that justice is a clever tactic the weak use to circumvent the strong, and that he fears no gods. In this back and forth, we see Euripides taking the Homeric idea of a Cyclops who doesn't respect Zeus or Xenia, and he's just sprinting with it. Now Polyphemus is basically an atheistic capitalist. He's counting his merchandise, and he's arguing that the only thing worthy of worship is wealth. To punctuate his impiety, when he invites Odysseus and his men inside, he promptly eats two of the sailors. And this is when Odysseus starts plotting his escape. He drops the classic line that his name is Nobody. He then gets the Cyclops drunk, and Euripides adds this delightful exchange in which metonymy is used to create confusion. Metonymy is a poetic device when a concept is referred to by the name of something associated with that concept. So like we say the crown when we're talking about a king or a queen or royal family. If I say lend me your ear, ear is a symbol of attention, which is associated with listening, which is associated with ears. Ancient poetry uses metonymy a lot, employing the name of a god to talk about something that the god is associated with. So when Odysseus says to the Cyclops, I am well versed in the ways of Bacchus, which is another name for Dionysus, whom I have given thee to drink. He's saying like, I have given you Dionysus, I am giving you wine. So yeah, next time you go out drinking with friends, ask them to pass you the Dionysus and see how well that goes over. The Cyclops responds, and who is Bacchus? I like his aftertaste, but how does a god like being housed in a wineskin? It is not right that gods should be clad in leather. As if the god himself is like wriggling around inside the leather pouch. When Polyphemus wants to spread this god to his neighbors, like good followers of Dionysus do, Odysseus warns him that, quote, whoso stays home when drunk is wise. Sounds like sage advice, and it has the added benefit of keeping the Cyclops isolated. Polyphemus and Silenus then start drinking together, each hoarding the wine. At one point, the Cyclops catches the satyr sneaking an extra drink, and Silenus uses the worst excuse ever, saying, "No, but it kissed me for my good looks. It says it is in love with my handsome face." A plastered Polyphemus then calls Silenus his Ganymede, which would freak you out if you know who Ganymede is. He's the handsome prince that Zeus keeps as a cupbearer, and also his favored lover, which makes Silenus panic as the Cyclops starts dragging him away from everyone else for some special alone time. As Silenus puts it, "Outrageous treatment waits me, woe is me, most bitter shall I find the wine ere long." While all this is going on, Odysseus prepares to blind the Cyclops. He tries to conspire with the satyrs in the chorus, but they find excuses not to help. He's too far to stab. "I forgot how to walk. I've sprained my ankle." One literally says, "There's dust in my eye." Recognizing the chorus is going to be helpless here, Odysseus instead conscribes some of his men to help. They blind the Cyclops off stage, and the monster rushes to the onstage cave entrance, enraged and determined to prevent anyone from escaping, though now he has to endure the mockery from the suddenly emboldened satyrs. The nobody confusion now plays out, but instead of neighbors checking on Polyphemus, it's the chorus asking what happened, and when the Cyclops asks where no man is, the chorus helpfully answers, "Nowhere." Polyphemus asks them to help him find Odysseus, and they give him bad directions, causing him to ram his head into the cave wall. You can just imagine the sound effects that are being used to communicate all of this happening off stage, some sort of slapstick moment. This must have been delightful for the audience. The play ends with Odysseus' revelation of his true identity. Polyphemus fails at his attempts to sink Odysseus' ship with boulders, and the satyrs vow loyalty to Dionysus as they sail off with Odysseus to freedom. Now, you might think I would categorize this reworking as a comedy, and certainly it would have elicited plenty of laughs, both in antiquity and for modern-day audiences. But I'll actually be categorizing this one as a horror rendition of the Cyclops story. Let's go back to the beginning of the story, but look at this play one more time with an eye for the horror elements. First, when Odysseus arrives, Silenus says, quote, "They know not what manner of man our master Polyphemus is, to have set foot here in this cheerless abode and come to the jaws of the cannibal Cyclops in an evil hour." Slaves saying a newcomer doesn't know what he's getting into with some distant, monstrous master who could show up at any moment? That sounds like a good setup for a horror story. When Odysseus asks Silenus about this strange land, "But where are the city walls and the ramparts?" Silenus gives an unnerving answer. "There are none. The headlands, sir, are void of men. This," he explains, "is a land of Cyclops, who don't have the features of civilized Greece. Roving monsters with caves for roofed houses, no government, no agriculture, no alcohol, and thus it is a joyless land," Silenus adds, "and strangers are seen as having the, quote, daintiest meat." Ugh. Finally, he notes that no one has ever arrived here without being butchered. They are stuck on Murder Island, a place filled with cannibals. Creepy. When the Cyclops returns, you can actually see the terror with which he commands the satyrs. He asks if they've done their work and produced the full amount of milk and cheese. Imagine a master shouting at his trembling slaves with this line, quote, "What say you? One of you will soon be shedding tears from the weight of my club. Look up, not down." The satyrs look up, all the way to Zeus and Orion, as they put it, and they proudly say that they've made the Cyclops' breakfast just how he likes it. Jeez, it's no wonder that they blamed Odysseus' crew for stealing the Cyclops' goods. They are terrified. When the Cyclops sees Silenus, he talks about how the satyr looks bruised and beaten. Could just be that he's saying things or signs of past abuse, but we didn't get any of this description earlier. I can't help but imagine that the moment Silenus saw his master approaching, he had to hurry and think, and then suddenly started beating himself to make it look like a violent robbery had happened. He was contriving a story to explain the food in Odysseus' hands. And could you imagine this from the sailors' perspectives? Trading and chatting about wine, then all of a sudden your host starts smacking his head against stones and then trembles as this monstrous creature approaches, and then the Cyclops tells Silenus to get his cleavers and cauldron ready. All this leads Odysseus to moan, "O Pallas," which is to say, "O Athena, mistress mine, goddess daughter of Zeus, help me now, for I am come to toils and depths of peril worse than all at Ilium. The island of the Cyclops," he says, "is worse than the 10-year Trojan War." When Odysseus comes running back out of the cave and describes whatever happened in there to the chorus, it's a clever workaround for not being able to show the violence on stage, he says, "Now when that hell cook, God detested, had everything quite ready, he caught up a pair of my companions and proceeded deliberately to cut the throat of one of them over the yawning brazen pot. Bit of a warning coming up, this next 5-10 seconds will be a little bit violent. But the other he clutched by the tendon of his heel and, striking him against the sharp point of rocky stone, dashed out his brains. Then, after hacking the fleshy parts with glutton cleaver, he set to grilling them, but the limbs he threw into his cauldron to sieve. Yeesh, that is horrifying. Pay attention to the eeriness that sounds might have produced for the audience. In the scene when Odysseus gets Polyphemus drunk, Odysseus is forced to wait on the Cyclops, who is laughing and singing over the sounds of the wailing sailors. When the chorus of satyrs initially agrees to help Odysseus, they continue to describe the sounds, claiming that no note of Asiatic lyre would sound more sweetly in our ears than news of the Cyclops' death. Euripides is using sensation to bring us to the Cyclops' terrifying cave. A further horror element explored by Liam Connerly is not just the presence of terrifying imagery, but how often that imagery approximates homeliness and hospitality. It's not a foreign terror here. It is a warped version of something familiar, the uncanny valley, but for ancient Greece. We actually see this a lot in modern horror. What's worse than a glaring villainous murderer? A smiling, laughing, maniacal murderer. You want to make something creepy? Have a child singing or a crib rocking, things that approximate joy and innocence, and it's that very proximity that magnifies the eeriness. Connerly points to several aspects that are so close to and yet so far from the familiar, like the cave furnishings, stools, skins, pens, stocked inventory, food and drink in a market like bargaining. And yet this is a lawless land. A failure in the bargaining means getting eaten. Where guest gifts might customarily have been exchanged, remember Xenia, the Cyclops instead offers a gruesome death. Here's Connerly's translation. You will receive guest gifts like these, so you cannot complain. Fire. And this ancestral bronze, which once heated will nicely enfold your flesh. Instead of a libation for the gods, Polyphemus proclaims his belly theology. Quote, I sacrifice to no one but myself, not to the gods, and to the greatest divinity, this belly. Even the elements of identity confusion can contribute to a horrific sense of disorientation. There's the false name Nobody, but also the blinding of the one eye that lets the Cyclops count his inventory, see his surroundings, recognize those with whom he's interacting. As Connerly puts it, promises fail, prayers do not bind, names slide between mask and essence. Even the chorus augments the confusion, adding to Odysseus's nobody a dizzying nowhere. Here, the Cyclops haunts, and in the end, is haunted. Addressing the comedic elements among the horror, Connerly points to Jeffrey Cohen's 7 Theses on monster culture, where Cohen notes that one unnerving element of monsters is that they defy categorization. They're not quite man, not quite animal, they don't fit cleanly into a taxonomic system, which is going to really annoy Aristotle, which makes me happy. You're never really sure what you're dealing with, what they're capable of, and what will work or what will fall on deaf ears or blind eyes in this case. Are you safe or are you seconds away from death? That disquiet persists through any laughter, and the singing and the cackling of the Cyclops over the sailors' wails must have been quite unnerving. That figure at the end, stumbling about in the dark, doesn't resolve fear, he circulates it. Connerly's conclusion? Euripides did not tame Homer's cave, he brought it home. But comedy lies in the Cyclops' future. Let's fast forward a little more to another rendition of the unfortunate character. What's the opposite of horror as a genre? It's gotta be romcom, right? And yep, that's where we're going next. Polyphemus the Cyclops as a romantic comedy. Not too long after Euripides, Philoxenus of Cythera wrote his own poem about Polyphemus, a poem which may share the title of Euripides' play, Cyclops, but it's also called Galatea. This poem was meant to be performed as a dithrum, a Greek hymn to be sung and danced in honor of, yet again, Dionysus. The god may have ditched Olympus, but he is all over the place throughout Greece. And again, satyrs might have been featured, as the chorus singing would have been comprised of about 50 men or boys dancing in a circle, possibly dressed as satyrs, and probably accompanied by an aulos, a kind of double flute. Now, this particular story is a bit tricky to share because we don't exactly have it. Only fragments remain, with comments and parodies and references from other authors. So what I'm going to share here is not just the dithrum by Philoxenus, but the tradition tradition that, as far as we can tell, began with Philoxenus. So, fragment 818 begins with Odysseus trapped in the cave, but it is here that a totally new plot element develops. Trying to get the Cyclops to let him go, Odysseus says, "I am a sorcerer. I know incantations and binding charms and love spells, which Galatea is unlikely to resist. I'll produce her here in person, made compliant by many enchantments. She'll beg and beseech you, and you will play coy and hide your true feelings." Then we get one of the comedy elements. How do you get a girl to fall in love with a monster? Odysseus says, "But one thing worries me in all this. I'm afraid the goat stink of your fleecy blankets may be offensive to a girl who lives in luxury and washes many times a day. So it would be a good idea if you put everything in order and swept and washed and fumigated your room. And better still if you prepared wreaths of ivy and bindweed to garland yourself and your darling girl. Come on, why waste time? Why not put your hand to the door now?" How do you think Polyphemus reacted to this? Doesn't it feel a little salesman-esque? Why wait? Buy now! Well, the fragment ends with the Cyclops' response. At this, Polyphemus roared with laughter and clasped his hands, and Odysseus imagined he was beside himself with joy at the thought that he would win his darling. But instead, he stroked him under the chin and said, "No, man, you seem to be a shrewd little fellow, a smooth businessman. Start work on some elaborate scheme, however, for you won't escape from here." Ooh, so close, Odysseus. Maybe next time. But we're left wondering, what did the Cyclops actually feel? Was Odysseus grasping at straws here, or did Polyphemus really harbor affection for the sea nymph Galatea? We might get a hint from ancient commentary on a 4th century BCE play by Aristophanes called Plutus, or Wealth, a portion of which parodies Philoxenus. The commentary mocks Philoxenus' portrayal of a civilized Cyclops, one that carries a leather bag, eats herbs, and plays a cithara for Galatea. It's worth noting the cithara would have taken quite some skill to play. Polyphemus, it seems, has gotten quite the glow up. He's a bit more cleaned up, and he's a musician, and he'll talk about philosophy, ideas, and love. 6 centuries later, Athenaeus of Naucratis wrote his Deipnosophistae, which literally translates to the dinner philosophers. You can just imagine them sitting at a table and talking nonstop even well past dessert. Here, Athenaeus notes that the Cyclops of Philoxenus praised the beauty of Galatea, everything about her but her eyes, as though a premonition of his own blindness. Polyphemus apparently addressed her as, quote, "fair-faced, golden-tressed, grace-voiced offshoot of the Euripides, the loves." It would seem the Cyclops did harbor some affection for the sea nymph. So, what came of their romance? One of the fullest accounts that we have, which stemmed from the lost narrative of Philoxenus, comes from the Idylls of the Greek poet Theocritus. An idyll is a short poem about rustic life, and this Theocritus is the creator of what came to be called pastoral poetry, poems about shepherds. Read the Odyssey and you'll notice just how many characters herd animals. You have Eumaeus the swineherd, Philoetius the cowherd, Melanthius the goatherd, an Ithacan herdsman that's really Athena in disguise, and of course, Polyphemus the Cyclops shepherd. Pastoral poetry idealizes and explores the farm worker's lifestyle. In Homer's Odyssey, a seer named Telemus had prophesied that Polyphemus would someday lose his sight at the hand of a man named Odysseus. Theocritus takes the seer and then has him talk to the Cyclops about Galatea the sea nymph too. "You poor fool, do not see but sit sweetly piping," he says. And yes, this is probably a subtle jab at the soon-to-be-blind Cyclops. You do not see. But at present, it's love that blinds the Cyclops to the sea nymph's mischiefs. Telemus talks about how she's always pelting his flocks and sheepdog with apples and calling Polyphemus names. When Polyphemus wants to talk to her, she flees, and when he loses interest, she gets close enough to keep him on the hook. But Polyphemus snaps back that he's not as blind as the prophet thinks, and his reply is just delightful. I've got to read it to you. "I saw when she pelted the flock, it did not escape me. No, by my one sweet eye may I see with it to the last." Good luck with that. "And may Prophet Telemus carry his hostile mouthings home to keep for his children. But I too can use the goad," a sort of way of saying, I can be tricky too. "So I take no notice, and tell her I've another woman now." Hearing that, she's all consumed with spite. When she's seen enough of this act of mine, perhaps she'll send a messenger, but I'll bar my door until she vows in person to make my bed up fairly on this isle. He's trying to make her jealous. Certain to work. And then he goes on, "Certainly I'm not ugly, as they call me, for lately I looked in the sea. There was a calm, and I thought my cheeks and my one eye showed up handsome, and my teeth shone back wider than Parian marble. Gosh, isn't that great? In Idyll 11, we get more of the love story, and it's just so wonderful. Theocritus takes us back to when Polyphemus was but a lad, barely any beard on his lip, when he met and fell in love with Galatea. He's described as sitting alone on the beach, suffering from a mortal wound Aphrodite dealt with her arrow to his heart. But like the rom-com of 500 Days of Summer, this is not a love story. Polyphemus is determined to overcome this affliction of lovesickness, and how does he do it? With music, of course. Homer had Polyphemus whistle while he worked, Euripides had him sing while he got drunk, and Philoxenus apparently had him play the cithara. Theocritus takes these and weaves them all into a session of music therapy for the Cyclops. Let's look at what he sings. First, it sounds like a love song. He describes her beauty and how they met. "Oh, white Galatea, why do you spurn my love? Whiter than curds to look on, softer than a lambskin, more skittish than a calf, tartar than the swelling grape." Love how all these descriptors come from things he's encountered in past stories. Livestock, milk, the grape of the vine. "How do you walk this way so soon as sweet sleep laps me, and are gone as soon, whenever sweet sleep leaves me, fleeing like a sheep when she spies the grey wolf coming?" He's dreaming about her. How sweet. Now to how they met. "I fell in love with you, maiden, the first time you came with my mother, eager to cull the bluebells from our hillside. I was your guide. Once seen, I could not forget you, nor to this day can I yet. Not that you care, God knows that you do not. Not a whit." So his mother brought the sea nymph to the island, and Polyphemus gave Galatea the tour, during which time he fell head over heels for her. But alas, it's unreciprocated love. And why? He sings the answer. "Oh, I know my beauty, the reason why you shun me. The shaggy eyebrow that grins across my forehead, unbroken ear to ear, the one eye beneath, and the nose squat over my lips. For all my looks, I'd have you know, I graze 1,000 sheep, and draw the best milk for myself to drink." He recognizes he's ugly. He's just trying to sell her on the idea. Sort of, I know I'm not pretty, but here's what I do have to offer. I am never without cheeses, summer or fall. Even in midwinter, my cheese nets are laden. There's not another Cyclops who can play the flute as I can. And I sing of you, my peach. Always of me and you, till dead of night, quite often. I'm sure that never gets old. I'm rearing 11 fawns, all with white collars for you, and 4 bear cubs. What woman does not want 4 bear cubs? Would you rather have the man or the bear? I'll take 4. Come to us then, you'll lack for nothing. Leave the green sea gulping against the dry shore. You'll do better on nights with me in my cave. I've laurels there. Hey, it's like he took Odysseus's advice from the last one. I've laurels there, and slender cypresses, black ivy growing, and the honey-fruited vine, and the waters fresh that tree-dressed Aetna sends me. Etna, this is a volcanic mountain on the island of Sicily where all this is taking place. Etna was also part of the set in Euripides' stage play. A drink divine distilled from pure white snow, who to choose instead to stay in the salt sea waves. And if my looks repel you, seeming over shaggy, I've a heart of oak within, and under the ash a spark that's never out. If you will fire me gladly, I will yield my life, or my one eye, the most precious thing I have. Wow. That's just sweet. See, I'm not crazy for finding myself on Team Cyclops back in the Odyssey. Ancient authors saw that potential too, and they turned the pair into star-crossed lovers, as Polyphemus laments in the next verse. Oh, why did not my mother bring me to birth with gills? Down I'd dive and kiss your hand, your lips if you'll allow, and bring you white narcissus flower, or soft poppies with wide red petals. Not both at the same time, for one's, you see, a winter, the other a summer flower. I love this note. I don't know why, his brain gets sidetracked, some tangent about like, oh, well, let me explain why I can't bring you both flowers at the same time, and he just has to explain the technicality. It's just great. And so is the next part. Even so, sweetheart, I've made a start. I'm going to learn to swim. If some stranger comes this way, sailing in a ship, and find out why it is you nymphs like diving in the deep. That's Odysseus. He just wanted to learn how to swim, and Odysseus blinded him. Oh, won't you come out, Galatea, and coming out, forget as I sit here fear forget to go back home. You'd learn to like to shepherd sheep with me, and milk, and set the curds for cheese, dropping in sharp rennet. I had to look up rennet. It's something used in cheese making to coagulate milk. Don't worry about it. Only my mother does me wrong, and it's her I blame. She's never said a single word on my behalf to you. For all she sees me growing thin day by day, I shall tell her that my head and both my feet are throbbing, so I'll be even, making her suffer even as she makes me. So her mom's not being the wingman. Athena will help you out, but Polyphemus' mom, nope, you're on your own. Don't you just want to give this guy a hug? He's trying to lose weight. He wants to learn to swim. He sings songs for her. He's tidying up the place. He's trying to make his shepherd life look as warm and cozy and inviting as possible, but it's all for naught. She's a being of the water. He's a being of the land. Yes, his parents are a sea nymph and the literal god of the seas, but I don't know, he takes after his grandpa or something, I guess. Too much Titan to tolerate the tides. In the final verse, he talks himself out of all the could-have-beens, and in this way he cures himself of Aphrodite's arrow. Cyclops, where is this mad flight taking you? You'd surely show more sense if you'd keep at your basket weaving, and go gather the olive shoots and give them to the lambs. Milk the ewe that's at hand. Why chase the ram that's fleeing? Perhaps you'll find another Galatea, and more fair. Many a girlie calls me out to play with her by night, and when I do their bidding, don't they giggle gleefully? I too am clearly somebody, and noticed on dry land. He'll find someone someday, he says, someone who's a land dweller like he is. He's assured himself that he's handsome, and there are other fish in the sea. Oh, probably a bad metaphor in this case, sorry. Now, I'll admit, I'm a little unsure about this categorization as a rom-com. It's just, it's endearing, but it's sad, but it's funny at the same time. I mean, I laughed while reading these. There are sad parts, yes, but there are also hopeful parts, and none of these stories is clearly one genre. The horror had humor, the funny parts are also sad, and we've already seen how monsters mix categories. I don't want to call this pure romance. The feelings are unrequited, and the lovers, or rather non-lovers, do not end up together in the end. I'd say that this is one of those rom-coms that when we finally get the movie form, it's gonna make us laugh, and also cry, and it'll have this bittersweet ending that makes you feel like, it's too bad, but also it's right. It might have felt forced if they tried to make it work out. It's going to be the Hunchback of Notre Dame, basically. Wait, who's this guy? The great Roman poet and king of love himself, Ovid, blends the love-struck Cyclops of Theocritus with the brute in Homer for his rendition of Polyphemus in his narrative poem Metamorphoses, but he complicates the story by adding Acchus. The love story is now a love triangle. And you'll never guess where the story starts. No, seriously, guess. I'll give you a hint. Galatea is talking to a friend about Polyphemus. Any ideas? Well, book 13 of Metamorphoses has Galatea talking to Scylla. Yes, Scylla, the monster who ate 6 of Odysseus' men. They're buddies, apparently, having a girls' night out. Scylla's literally combing Galatea's hair while the girls are talking about boys. It's just so very Ovid. The setting sounds comical, but Galatea's sigh and assurances that she's safe set a very different tone. She says, "I could not foil the Cyclops' love except in bitter grief." Scylla wipes away the sea nymph's tears and replies, "Tell me, darling, do not hide. You know you can trust me. How you were so hurt." The trouble started with the introduction of Acchus. His mother was Semithis, a naiad, which is kind of like a sea nymph, but naiads live in freshwater like springs and lakes instead of the saltwater dwelling oceanids and nereids. Think back to Polyphemus bemoaning the land versus the sea elements separating him from Galatea. Now she's talking to someone also descended from a fellow water dweller. Oof. To add a little extra insult, Acchus' father was Pan, god of shepherds and flocks and rustic music, and he was a companion of the nymphs. Basically, Pan was everything Polyphemus wished he could be, but could not be. Here's how Galatea tells the story to Scylla. "Acchus was a great joy to both his parents, and a greater joy to me, for me and me alone he loved. He was 16, the down upon his cheek scarce yet a beard, and he was beautiful. He was my love, but I was Cyclops' love, who wooed me endlessly, and if you ask me whether my hate for him or my love for Acchus was stronger in my heart, I could not tell, for both were equal." Oof, harsh. She then calls Polyphemus a, quote, savage creature, the forest's terror, whom no wayfarer set eyes upon unscathed. You can imagine her sneer as she describes his beautification efforts to Scylla. Now lovelorn Polyphemus cared for his looks, cared earnestly to please. Now with a rake he combed his matted hair, and with a sickle trimmed his shaggy beard, and studied his fierce features in a pool, and practiced to compose them. His wild urge to kill, his fierceness and his lust for blood ceased, and in safety ships might come and go. In classic Ovidian fashion, the story of the seer Telemus employs very clever wordplay. That one eye upon your brow Ulysses soon shall take. He, the Cyclops, answered laughing, you delude yourself. Of all the stupid prophets, someone else has taken it already. So he mocked the warming truth and trampled along the shore with giant crushing strides. And we find out just who has taken the Cyclops' eye already. At night, Polyphemus sat by the sea, took his pipe, and played a song, right over Galatea, who was hiding behind a rock in Arcas's arms. She reports to Calypso his words with remarkable memory, for he goes on and on and on for far too many lines, describing how cruelly beautiful and beautifully cruel Galatea is, and she apparently remembers all of it word for word and describes it back to Scylla. And it just goes on forever. I swear every time Ovid copies someone, he has to try to one-up them. Polyphemus lists all the good things in his life that Galatea will have a share in, or that she'll possess, if she'll only be his. Here's a taste of Ovid's version of his song. I found one day among the mountain peaks, for you to play with, twins, so much alike you could scarce tell, cubs of a shaggy bear. I found them, and I said, she shall have all these, I'll keep them for my mistress for her own. Now Galatea, raise your glorious head from the blue sea, spurn not my gifts, but come, for sure I know I have just seen myself reflected in the pool, and what I saw was truly pleasing. See how large I am. No bigger body Zeus himself can boast up in the sky. My ample hair overhangs my grave stern face, and like a grove darkens my shoulders. And you must not think me ugly, that my body is so thick with prickly bristles. Trees without... I'll call this part. Trees without their leaves are ugly, and a horse is ugly too, without a mane to veil its sorrel neck. Feathers clothe birds, and fleeces grace the sheep. So beard and bristles best become a man. Upon my brow I have one single eye, but it is huge, like some vast shield. What then? Does not the mighty sun see from the sky all things on earth? Yet the sun's orb is one. Clearly Ovid detected the humorous elements of earlier authors too, and had fun playing with them. But then Polyphemus gets to Arcas and asks why she prefers his arms over those of the Cyclops. And this lament quickly escalates to violence. Give me but the chance, he'll find my strength no smaller than my size. I'll gouge out his living guts. Jeez, that's romantic. I'll rend his limbs and strew them in the fields and in the sea, your sea, so he may be one flesh with you. I burn, the fire you fight is fanned aflame. All Aetna's furnace in my breast I bear, and you, my Galatea, never care. So Ovid takes this idea of fire from the previous author and then adds on to it the volcano, the Aetna, and just... I love that imagery. All the volcano in my breast I bear. It's so cool. I imagine this like a roaring tree beard, but, you know, a Cyclops on fire. Imagine that. This giant image towering over you. Now imagine being Arcas in this case. This is the threat that you just received. Do not move an inch. Well, one of them moved, or something happened that made Polyphemus notice them hiding, and he roars. I see you, now I shall make sure that loving fond embrace shall be your last. Oof. Loud as an angry Cyclops ought to shout, he shouted. Aetna shuddered at the din. The volcano shook. Then I, in panic, dived into the sea beside us. Arcas had already turned his hero's back and shouted as he fled, help, Galatea, father, mother, help, admit me to your kingdom, for I die. Sort of take me back into the waters. Cyclops pursued and hurled a massive rock torn from the hill, and though its merest tip reached Arcas, yet it crushed and smothered him. This time the Cyclops' boulder hit its mark. Now, this is the poem Metamorphoses, so something has to change, and sometimes it's quite humorous how Ovid shoves in some sort of mutation last second in a story. But I actually like this particular metamorphosis. Galatea the sea nymph, who fled where Acchus could not follow, returns to her crushed lover. Seeing the blood spill from his remains, she, quote, caused Acchus to assume his ancestral powers, a reference to his stream-dwelling naiad mother. Galatea converts his blood into sparkling waters, creating the stream at the foot of Mount Etna in Sicily, which is called the River Acchus. A nice little origin story there. Let's conclude with something happier. It might warm your heart to know that not all authors gave Polyphemus such a tragic story. The Latin poet Propertius wrote that Galatea, quote, wheeled her brine-wet horses to Polyphemus's songs. The Hellenized Syrian satirist Lucian of Samosata went so far as to have Galatea defend the Cyclops when her jealous sister Doris sarcastically congratulates her on her love conquest. But my favorite success story, one I would definitely categorize in the romance genre, has to come from the Greek epic poet Nonnus, in his sprawling 5th century CE epic Dionysiaca. And yes, Dionysus is back, yet again. And this story of his life is the longest surviving poem from classical antiquity. In multiple sections, Nonnus tells us some little delightful tidbit about the Cyclops and the sea nymph. It starts in book 6, where Pan is searching for Galatea, and where he mocks her love for Polyphemus. Then Pan, well soaked, saw Galatea swimming under a neighboring wave-beaten rock and sang out, "Where are you going, Galatea? Have you given up sea for hills? Perhaps you are looking for the love song Cyclops. Come leave your Polyphemus the laggard. If you like, I will lift you up on my own back and save you." He offers to save Galatea in the very way that would have saved Acchus in Ovid's version. Interesting, but not as interesting to me as that question, have you given up sea for hills? With the earlier fretting that the two were star-crossed, the Cyclops being a being of earth, the nymph a being of sea. Here's a hint that maybe they've overcome the divide, though Galatea's answer leaves us wondering. She says, "Don't waste your time in asking me why I am going here this day. I have another and higher voyage. Let be the song of Cyclops, though it is sweet. I seek no more the Sicilian sea. I am terrified at this tremendous flood, and I care nothing for Polyphemus." And what of the Cyclops himself? We get this note in book 14. Polyphemus, tall as the clouds, so mighty and so great, the earth shaker's own son, he was kept in his place by another love, dearer than war, under the watery ways. For he had seen Galatea half hidden, and made the neighboring sea resound as he poured out his love for a maiden in the wooing tones of his pipes. Now, we don't know how Galatea reacted to his music, but we do get this fascinating line way later in book 43, when Poseidon had led the sea gods into battle against the armies of Dionysus in the Indian War. It's a whole thing, don't worry about it. The Nereids have joined Poseidon, and Galatea is described as, quote, lifting the club of her lovesick Polyphemus as her weapon of war. What? I wish we had the story of how that happened. There must have been some sort of moment when she had to leave and the two spoke. Maybe Polyphemus noticed the nymphs departing. Maybe she came to him and said that she had to leave for a time, and he offered her his club so she could protect herself. And imagine what that must have looked like. The nymphs and Poseidon with spears and tridents as their arms, except for one lone sea nymph who was wielding a massive club. There's one more hint at an unwritten interaction later in the same book, book 43. At the wedding of Poseidon, the Cyclops' father, and Beroe. Galatea twangled a marriage dance and restlessly twirled in capering step, and she sang the marriage verses, for she had learnt well how to sing, being taught by Polyphemus. He taught her to sing. From these authors we have glimpses of a love story, a nymph and a Cyclops. He sings to her, and she rides horses of water to his music. He learns how to swim, and she learns how to sing. Though he cannot follow her to war, he can keep her safe in spirit as she wields his club. It would have been a sight, but she wielded it without shame. Maybe she was too embarrassed to admit anything when Pan challenged her, but by the time she's fighting alongside Poseidon, who cares what people know or what they would say? Let them talk. I just love that. So, what became of the Cyclops and the sea nymph? Well, it depends on who you ask. Philoxenus and Theocritus would have said it was unreciprocated love. Ovid had said that the love triangle ended in tragedy. We don't get an end from Lucian or Nonnus, but there was an ancient Greek lyric poet, Bacchylides. In the fragments we have of his surviving poetry, there's one small line that mentions a name, Galatis. son of Polyphemus and Galatea. In another account by the Greek historian Appian of Alexandria, in the first chapter of the Illyrian Wars, the story is a little different. They say that the country received its name from Illyrius, the son of Polyphemus, for the Cyclops Polyphemus and his wife Galatea had 3 sons, Celtus, Illyrius, and Gallus, all of whom migrated from Sicily, and the nations called Celts, Illyrians, and Galateans took their origin from them. So not only did Polyphemus and Galatea have multiple children, but those children are the ancestors of the Celts, people that would have lived in a Baltic region, and the Gauls. That's just so cool. We don't know the actual story of Polyphemus, Galatea, or any of these other characters because there is no actual story. We can't know anything about Polyphemus or Galatea any more than the ancient authors did. These aren't facts of history that can be verified. They're literary creations made and remade time and time again through history. So, who was Polyphemus? You're as free to decide as all these authors were.